Hello, my friends. It's Nick, the ASMR nerd, and welcome to another episode of Relaxing Reviews. Today, we're looking at a really interesting product. Imagine, if you will, for a moment, a game controller that combined the best of a keyboard with all the strengths of a controller, merged them into one. That is essentially what we're looking at here today, or what Wooting, the company that makes the Wooting 60 HE keyboard that we're looking at here today, is pitching with this product. The Wooting HE60 is a fully analog keyboard, and what that means is that each switch has analog sensitivity. It has pressure sensitivity from the top right down to the bottom, just like analog triggers on a controller or thumbsticks on a controller. They have a range of motion that the controller can sense, rather than just an on or off binary input. On a traditional mechanical keyboard with conventional switches, each switch is binary. It's either on, actuated, or off. But that's not the case with the Wooting 60 HE. This unlocks a whole variety of potentially interesting possibilities. Think about where you use analog control in video games, maybe on the throttle for a racing game, or for a variable speed movement in a shooter to be able to move slower or faster. This is what Wooting is promising with the 60 HE, and it is what sets it apart from every other keyboard on the market. I always say these days that to be successful in the very crowded mechanical keyboard space, the very competitive space, you need a hook that sets your product apart, and Wooting definitely has a hook. So I'm very keen to see if this keyboard lives up to Wooting's promises. Aside from its flagship feature of fully analog control on every switch, it has a bunch of other desirable features for a gaming keyboard these days, including hot swap sockets, RGB backlighting, double shot PBT keycaps, at least on the American version of the keyboard, or North American version, and shockingly, a industry-leading 4-year warranty. I've never seen a 4-year warranty on a keyboard before, but that's what Wooting is advertising. So they are selling all this for $175, which is an interesting proposition because it puts it up against some very high-quality keyboards, but it offers something that none of the others do. So for all those reasons, I'm really keen to take a look at the Wooting 60 HE here today and see if Wooting can deliver on its promise, I should say, of giving us the best of both worlds. You know what else gives us the best of both worlds? It's this video's sponsor, Into the AM. Into the AM are sellers of elevated everyday apparel, which means their clothing looks great, looks so fresh, like this beautiful autumnal camping scene t-shirt that I've got right here that they sent over recently. They have hundreds of exclusively licensed designs. Some of them look kind of naturey like this. Other ones look kind of psychedelic or spacey or kind of synth wavy. They've got all kinds of different stuff, and all of their clothes look amazing. They feel amazing, super comfortable, really easy to wear all day long, slightly stretchy in this case, nicely fitted. That goes for their graphic tees. It also goes for their joggers, which I'm wearing right now, my favorite pair of joggers that I own, to their underwear, to their hoodies. All of it looks great, feels great, and is easy to care for. These graphic tees come pre-shrunk, so really easy to just throw in the wash. You don't have to worry about them at all. the reason this is the best of both worlds is because not only are these clothes awesome, but they are also available at a 10% discount for you if you use the link down in the video description or use coupon code TheASMRNerd at checkout. It will save you 10% off your entire order of graphic tees, of hoodies, of joggers, of caps, of underwear, whatever they have that you want. You can save 10% on with that link down at the top of the video description or using code TheASMRNerd at checkout. So head on over, take a look at what Into the AM has to offer. They're always getting in new designs, all kinds of beautiful stuff, all kinds of comfortable stuff available for 10% off. That's what I call the best of both worlds. Big thanks to Into the AM for sponsoring today's video. And with all that said, it's time to jump into this review. So as usual, this is going to be pretty long. There's going to be lots of parts to it. There will be chapter markers down in the play bar at the bottom of the screen and timestamps down in the video description, so you can jump around however you like. But we'll be starting with an unboxing and product inspection. Then we'll have a look at the backlighting and the software functionality. Then we'll have a typing test where you can hear and see this keyboard in action. Then we'll come back here and I'll let you know about my experience using the keyboard, whether I think this analog switch thing is useful or gimmicky or well implemented, or maybe just kind of falls flat on its face. We'll find out. And then finally, I will run down the pros and the cons of this product before giving you my final verdict. Let's get to it. And here we have the Wooting 60 HE in box. And it's a pretty minimalistic looking box, at least at first glance, but it's actually got something pretty cool. If you look a little bit closer, you'll see that what initially looks like just, I don't know, sort of field lines, some sort of aesthetic choice on the box here, is actually comprised of a bunch of names, usernames, online handles, things like that. These are the names of people who backed this project, who kickstarted it back in 2021, and those names wrap right around the box onto the back as well. And that's a pretty cool way of acknowledging those backers. I like what Wooting has done there. Aside from the backer name, so we've got the Wooting logo in top left here. We've got, of course, the name of the keyboard down here. We've got nothing on the sides, just backer names. And then on the spine of the box here, we do have a bit of information. We have, of course, the name. We have the layout. It's the American ANSI layout rather than the European ISO. We have the keycaps. So this comes with the US PBT keycap set. In North America, you can only get this keyboard, stock at least, with the PBT keycaps. And weirdly, through most of Europe, you can only get it with ABS caps, not the PBT caps. I'm really not sure why that is, but that just seems to be the case. So bear that in mind if you are ordering one. I mean, I suppose you could order the US ANSI layout in Europe and get the PBT caps, but the ISO keycaps only appear to be available in ABS plastic. And for those who don't know what the difference is, they're just different kinds of plastics. Generally, enthusiasts seem to favor PBT. It doesn't shine up quite as easily from finger oils and usage over time, but both are going to be plenty durable. They feel a little bit different, they sound a little bit different, but both will last just fine. The switches are Wooting's Lecker Linear 60s, which are their patented Hall effect switches. They are designed in collaboration with Gateron as the OEM. And I believe it only comes in black. Pretty sure that's the only option here. So that's what we've got here. On the back, really nothing. No advertising, no feature set or anything like that. It simply says take control in this kind of pixel art looking aesthetic font. Then Wooting.io being their website. Overall, this kind of packaging makes a lot of sense for a keyboard that is sold primarily, perhaps exclusively online through Wooting's website. It doesn't look like the kind of thing you'd see on a retail shelf, but it doesn't have to be, right? It doesn't have to have all the fancy features on the back like a box from Corsair or something would. So that's that, and I think it's time we opened this up. So let's do that. Oh, there's one other feature right here. We have a little image of a keyboard. I guess maybe showing that this is a 60% layout. All right, let's open this. And here we have the Wooting 60 HE nestled quite comfortably within some padding just made of cardboard, which is really nice. That's going to be recyclable very easily, and it should keep the keyboard nice and cozy and safe. We have a little heart down here, which is very cute. Over here it says take control. This is a carrying strap which attaches to the top left of the keyboard, as we'll see shortly. As a matter of fact, up here they actually show us how that works. So it says up here, we helped you a hand. Doesn't sound grammatically correct. And kept the super boring paper manual out. Instead, quickly get started by visiting their website. That's pretty typical these days. There's a QR code you can scan to get to that online manual. We have a strap assembly diagram here. We've just got what look like little screws that attach the strap with a kind of a reinforced bit right here. And then we've got this here. It's funny, they say, we've kept out the paper manual, which is all well and good, but then they include this paper postcard. Greetings from Wooting, it says. Now, I must admit, I'm actually not quite sure where Wooting is. I didn't do my homework to look up where Wooting is, but perhaps it will tell us if we can get this out of here. Looks like it's just sort of stuck on here. There we go. And we've got, it is literally a postcard. Greetings from Wooting. We've got a windmill here. Is this, they're skating on a canal? I should recognize this flag. Maybe Wooting is in the Netherlands. Maybe that's where they're at. I'm not sure. Thanks for your support and contribution. If you ever need a favor, write it down here and send the postcard to us. We will do our best to make it happen. P.S. Don't forget to share your contact information. That's kind of cute. So it's kind of their support card, but they've made it a postcard. I don't know how well that works, but it's a cute idea anyway. You can see actually in the Wooting name here, they have pictures of people with the keyboard, perhaps from the development team. I'm not sure. Anyway, that's kind of cute. And aside from that, we've just got the board here. Although there's probably some other accessories hidden beneath, if I had to guess. So conveniently, it tells us to lift here. So let's try that. We're lifting here, and maybe we should take the keyboard out first. What do you guys think about that? I'm not sure if that's what they mean, but we've got a plastic dust cover, which you are welcome to use if you like, but as I always quip in these videos unboxing keyboards, I've yet to see anyone actually use this after opening the keyboard. But there it is. Let's take out the keyboard itself. We'll put it aside for just a moment. Okay, now we can lift here. And what have we got? Okay, we've got a few items here. First of all, let's remove this strap, perhaps. There we go. So this black and yellow kind of warning tape aesthetic is what they've chosen for the strap. I think it looks okay. And apparently there's also a keycap set with a similar matching aesthetic that you can purchase separately from Wooting if you like. So that'll be the carrying strap. It's a nice fabric strap. Seems to be pretty high quality. And then what else do we have? We have a random piece of fabric, or foam I should say, which I guess was maybe just keeping the keyboard in place, providing a little extra padding. Not quite sure. We have, of course, a braided USB cable with this nice sleeving that matches the yellow and black aesthetic of the carrying strap. We have USB-C on one end, nicely branded Wooting housing, a branded Wooting hook and loop fastener for wrapping your cable, and a branded USB-A housing on this end. It looks really nice. It feels really high quality. It looks pretty long too, actually. My understanding is this was a stretch goal on their Kickstarter for this color coordinated cable rather than just a black sleeved one. So that's pretty nice. Everyone gets to benefit from that. And we have a very crinkly little bag with some extra bits and pieces in it. Let's see what we've got. Other than that, that is everything. Nothing more in the box. So again, I commend Wooting for 99% of this being made of cardboard and therefore recyclable. Always nice to see. Okay, so we have a little Wooting branded baggie with a resealable zip lock up here, which is really nice actually, as opposed to just, some single-use plastic thing. And we use this, and inside, I'd like to take a moment to appreciate just how nice and crinkly this thing is. It's a nice sounding bag. It's probably not something most reviewers would comment on, but okay. And here we've got, okay, a few items. First of all, we have the strap mounting mechanism, which, interestingly, includes, oh no, it actually has all the screws in here, as depicted on the box, and the reinforced mount. But we've also got a couple of extra screws, and I guess these are just for the keyboard in case you somehow lose your screws. If you get a screw loose, I suppose. That's a thoughtful addition. I've never seen that before, but I'm not sure how you would lose a screw unless you're being very careless when you're disassembling. But also very thoughtfully, we have a couple of spare switches. These are the special Lecker switches, and we can see that they use a standard Cherry MX style plus shaped keycap mount, so you should be able to put pretty much any keycaps on there. The top housings appear to be a clear polycarbonate. The bottom housings, not quite sure what the material is, but it looks like it's maybe a nylon, something opaque and a bit softer. Hopefully that'll make for a nice bottom out. You can see how in the bottom of the stem there is a little magnet, and that will interact with the custom PCB to enable that Hall effect detection, where the proximity of that little magnet is measured by the PCB, and that is how Wooting offers all the magic that they have on this board that they advertise, with the analog detection, analog input, and adjustable actuation points and all that. We've got a nice big window up at the top here to allow for the RGB lights to shine through, which this board does have. And this is interesting in that there are no contact pins on the bottom of this switch, and of course that's because there's no electrical connection being made in the switch. It is exclusively based on this Hall effect, the proximity of this magnet to the sensor on the PCB, and so the only pins we have actually are these two right here, which will go into the holes on the PCB. But then of course these are plate mount switches, so it should still be a nice sturdy mount. Because there's no electrical conductivity to the switch itself, it is really smooth. It is really smooth, you guys. Listen, I'll see. Can you hear this at all? Very faintly. Very faintly. But the action is incredibly smooth. The little tick you're hearing is actually not the bottom out. The bottom out's very quiet. What you're hearing, see, this is the bottom out. Listen. What you're hearing is the rebound sound. So the rebound has a bit of a clack to it, but very, very quiet switches overall. The bottom out is almost non-existent. And these are, I believe, factory lubricated, and that would explain a large part of the smoothness. Of course, the lack of any contact on the interior, no leaf, no nothing, would also account for a lot of the smoothness. So interesting design, certainly sets it apart from other switches. And of course, this is hot swappable because, again, there's no contact pins on the bottom, so it's really easy to pop these in and out. There's nothing to solder, even if you wanted to solder. So by its very design, these switches are easily hot swappable, and that is why we have two spare switches included here, which Wooting kindly includes with the retail product, so that if something is to happen to one of your switches, you can easily swap them out. I believe you can also buy these direct from Wooting if you wanted some more. Of course, by virtue of its design, this Hall effect design, you won't be able to put other switches into this board. It's not designed to accommodate traditional, conventional mechanical switches, but that's the trade-off for the Hall effect tech that's in use here. Finally, we have a very basic, not branded, wire-style keycap puller, which is good to see in that this is the higher quality type of puller that you might get in these boxes. Strangely though, no switch puller actually, which is a little bit interesting since it is, of course, hot swappable. Alright, here we have the keyboard itself, and it's pretty unassuming from the get-go, isn't it? It is just a plain black aesthetic with a plain black case. It is absolutely standard 60% layout, nothing weird going on here. The upside of that is that you can swap any keycaps onto here that you want, and pretty much any set should fit. The downside is no dedicated arrow keys or anything. Over in the bottom right, up in the top left, we have this little bracket for our wrist strap, which we'll put on after, but we'll leave it off while we inspect the keyboard just to keep it out of the way. The front edge here is kind of rolled over. We have a kind of a smooth-ish edge here, and we have the Wooting logo on the front. The whole keyboard is plastic, so I'm a little disappointed that they didn't opt for aluminum upper on this. I think that would have really elevated the look and feel. I think it does look pretty good as it is from the top, but yeah, the lack of any kind of metal does hurt the feeling of quality and sort of the premium feel a little bit. Nevertheless, it has a decent heft to it. That's probably due to the layers of dampening pour-on foam and the silicone dampener, which they put in the bottom, which is a trend that I'm really glad to see continuing and developing. The first board that I ever used with that silicone dampener in the bottom was the HE60 from Mountain Keyboards. That thing sounds amazing, feels incredible, so I'm really hoping that'll be the case with the Wooting here as well. Around the sides, you can see we just have this ABS top plate. I'm guessing it's ABS anyway. It's sort of a standard plastic for a case like this. Again, the front edge is kind of rolled over here. We have this lip that goes all the way along. Similar situation on the other side, except we have that little attachment point here for the strap. On the back edge, oops, yeah, let's just drop it. On the back edge, we have, again, really nothing in terms of features except for a USB Type-C port over here on the back left corner. It would be nice to have the option to plug in on the right, the center, or the left, or as we've seen on some other keyboards, have a centered port and then a channel to route the cable out either side. Nonetheless, the back left corner is a pretty traditional, conventional spot for that USB port, so there it is. We have this kind of grill aesthetic going on here along the back. That's just for looks. It's not functional or anything. And then the case kind of wraps around the edges in this smooth fashion, and on the front as well. So we get this kind of pillowy look to the back. In terms of features on the back, virtually nothing. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 little anti-slip feet in yellow, which is nice. Of course, it matches that aesthetic that we've been seeing throughout, but no adjustable feet, no flip-out feet. It's a little bit disappointing, although, again, in the 60% size, it's pretty typical to just see the little rubber feet like this. We have centered on the back some product information with the model number, serial number, various kinds of things. It looks like maybe we have the names of the founders, perhaps. Down along the bottom there, it says, "We made the Wooting 60 HE for you. Please take good care of her." That's kind of cute. And we have the icon collection. I love that they actually label it the icon collection, because I always say that. There's a little collection of certification and logos here that no one ever really pays attention to. And on the back, it does also verify my suspicion, which is that this is developed and designed in the Netherlands. It says designed and engineered in the Netherlands, made in China, of course. So that's everything that's on the back there. Worth noting that there is sort of a natural angle. The case has a bit of a wedge shape to it, so you've got maybe, 3 degrees or 4 degrees of typing angle here. Probably no more than that. Just naturally as part of the board, and that cannot be adjusted. Alright, so in terms of the keycaps, I like what we're seeing here for the font treatment. It is very simple and clean. The legends look sharp. They are double shot. These are shine through double shot PVT keycaps, so that will allow the RGB lighting to come through nice and bright. The double shot tech in use here appears to be really good. I don't see any sort of stencily manufacturing artifacts or anything like that. The surface of the keys themselves is nicely textured. They have a bit of roughness to them. And again, because they're PVT, they should never shine up on you. They will kind of always retain their nice matte texture, which I appreciate. The profile, of course, is OEM. So again, very standard, nothing out of the ordinary there. Most people should be used to the sculpted profile offered by OEM keycaps. It's the most ubiquitous profile. Let's take off a keycap here and just take a look at how thick they are. And any other features we want to take note of. So again, the legends look nice and sharp. The centering looks very good. The consistency looks very good across the board. And here we have the back. So the double shot part means that each keycap is made from 2 fused pieces of plastic, the outer black part and the inner translucent part, which is sort of merged into the outer shell on the top, and that's how we get our shine through legends. These are nice and thick. There's no flex to speak of. These feel great. These look like quality keycaps, actually. They look really good. Underneath, we have what appears to be a white plate. And one of those lacquer switches just sitting in there. You can see that actually on the housing it says Gateron, which again, as I mentioned, is because these are manufactured in partnership with Gateron. There's a little LED sitting underneath that window up at the top. These are north-facing switches and LEDs, which should be fine for OEM keycaps. If you're trying to swap on cherry profile keycaps, you will occasionally run into cherry profile sets that will conflict a little bit with the north-facing design, and they'll bottom out a little differently. They'll still sit on just fine, but they might sound a little bit different than you would otherwise expect. However, for these OEM profile caps, it's no problem. They should work just great. So, the next order of business is, of course, the stabilized keys. As I say time and time again, the difference between a premium feeling keyboard and a cheap feeling keyboard often comes down largely to the stabilized keys. So that's the long keys, backspace, enter, shifts, and space bar. The stabilizers sit on either side of the key, prevent it from wobbling, and the The stabilizers are really hard to get right. It's really difficult to tune your stabilizers to feel good from the factory, so I always commend companies that manage to get them just right. Let's find out if Wooting is one of those companies. We'll start with the backspace. So it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's only the slightest bit of a rattle audible when you're pressing it on either extreme end of the key, but in the middle it sounds great. It's got a pretty loud clacky bottom out, so I'm guessing that they haven't padded the bottom out of the stabilizers, but we will lift off the keycap and take a closer look in a moment. But let's go to the enter key here. So again, only the faintest bit of rattle, but really good overall. These are clearly lubricated stabilizers. They've spent some time tweaking them and making them sound good. Let's try right shift. So a bit more rattle on that one, but nothing that a little bit of TLC couldn't improve. But overall not bad. Left shift. Similar situation, I would say, even slightly better sound control there. And the space bar, the hardest one of all. The space bar is really tough to get right. Let's hear it. So again, a little bit of rattle there, especially when you're pressing either extreme side. Definite rattle on the far left. Just a minor tick over on the right here. But overall, I would say a decent showing by Wooting here. Clearly, they've put some time and effort into tuning their stabilizers. They're probably lubed. They might be padded. Hard to tell. I don't think so, but maybe. And they are better than your average stock dry stabilizers. But I would say they're not quite up to par with, for example, the stabilizer treatment on Mountain's Everest 60 or on, for instance, the Varmillo board I unboxed recently. So pretty darn good, but not the best I've ever seen. Again, though, it's easy enough to pop these off and to potentially tune them yourself if you want to do a little bit of work with them. Let's just get this guy off of here. Again, those nice double shot PBT keycaps, feeling great. And there are the stabilizers. So they are standard looking plate mount Cherry MX style stabilizers. They're definitely lubed. And let's, you know what? Let's pull this off of here. I want to pull out the switch and the stabilizers just to look underneath to see what's going on there. And we have something to help us with that. Although Wooting only included the switch, or the keycap puller, pardon me, in the retail package, they did very kindly send along a couple of items here for this review. We have a lubing kit and a toolkit for lubing switches and stabilizers. So let's actually just take a moment here, put the keyboard up there, and we'll take a look at each of these kits. So let's start with the lube kit. I should point out that you can buy these separately on Wooting's website. I believe they're $20 for the lubes and maybe $25 or $30 for the tools, but if you buy them together as a package, it's $42 for both together. So let's just start with the lubes here. And we will get to the tools, which has a switch puller, which we will use to remove the switch and take a closer look at the stabilizers there. But I figured this would be a good opportunity to show these things and take a look at them. So, the lubricants come packaged in, once again, a resealable bag, much appreciated, with a lovely crinkle to it again. Nice sounding baggie. And then they come actually vacuum sealed in these plastic packages. And then within each of those is the lube. So this is the one that you might be the most familiar with. This is the Krytox 205G0, which is a very popular name brand switch lubricant. And I can see why they vacuum sealed them, because these actually seem to have a tendency to leak a little bit. This is definitely something you'd want to keep in the resealable bag, because it has leaked here a bit. We got 5 grams, or no, 10 grams, pardon me here, which should be enough to lube, gosh, probably 400 or 500 switches, quite a few. Krytox 205G0 is pretty much the standard for enthusiasts when it comes to switch lubing or lubing, you know, the stems on stabilizers, for example. And it's probably what Wooting has used on this here keyboard, I would bet, on the stabilizers and on their switches. Let me just, before I make a mess of things, let's put that back into this bag. There we go. It's definitely leak. You can see the sheen on my fingers. So that's a good thing that they have vacuum sealed them like this for transport. Then this here is a different kind of lubricant. It is the Molykote EM50L, which Wooting sells as a stabilizer lubricant, stabilizer grease they call it. They recommend it specifically for the stabilizer bar, the wire, rather than for the stems on the stabilizers. And that is because it is a much thicker, heavier lubricant. And this one doesn't appear to have leaked, which is good. Oh, they're sealed. This one is. The other one isn't, perhaps. It's a heavier kind of lube that should really do a good job of preventing that stabilizer wire from rattling. So this is the kind of thing that I would use to try and control some of the tick and rattle on those stabilizers right now. This is 4.2 grams and should last you for many, many stabilizers. So those are the lubes offered in that $20 lube package. Then we have the tools, the switch lubing and stabilizer lubing tools provided by this : / blank, which I've never heard of before, but I guess they make such tools. Let's unseal this. Because my hands are a little bit lubricated, I guess I'm going to be getting that all over this stuff. But okay, so here we have a really handy little item. This is a switch opener so that you can more easily open your switches. You pop your little switch in right here, and you can use this to pull the top off with ease. Also, this can act as a little switch tester if you wanted to as well. A really handy little item made of anodized aluminum, and now I'm getting my greasy fingerprints all over it, but very useful. If you're going to be lubing a lot of switches, you can find sort of switch lubing stations where you have a whole bunch of this kind of thing lined up, basically. Not the opener part, but just as a sort of mounting space for switches. But this allows you to do them one at a time at least. Here we have 2 very fine brushes for lubing your switches. They're both the same size of brush, same thickness, but one is in white, one is in black, so that you can keep your lubes separate. You could put your Krytox on your white and your Molly coat on your black, or whatever you like. Just allows you to keep them separate and easily identifiable. And then we have some handy dandy tools. Once again, anodized aluminum. We have some tweezers. These are very handy for picking and holding springs and stems and things like that, or small stabilizer wires if you wanted to. And they feel really well made. It's a shame that I'm getting them so greasy, but they feel nice, hefty, and actually these might be steel rather than aluminum. I'm not sure. They have a weight to them. But they've got a nice matte black finish, and they should work great for manipulating these small things that you might be using. And then we have, if we can get this out of the plastic, there you go. At long last, what I opened these for in the first place, the switch puller. These are hefty. This is probably the best quality switch puller I've ever seen. Once again, nice powder coated steel, I'm guessing in this case. Little shallow clips so you don't damage your switches when you pull them. And this is what we're going to use to remove this switch right here. So let's just do that. That comes in there and just grabs the little clips on the switch, and then we just pull up, and there we go. So another one of those Lecker switches. Oh yeah, right, this is really fun. So underneath each of the keys, underneath each of the switches on this board, resides a little stenciled image on the PCB. So this PCB is actually covered with these various images. This one's a little tidal wave by the looks of it. Each of those was picked by one of the backers who backed at the, I think, founders tier or something like that. One of the tiers they were selling this at on the Kickstarter anyway, one of the pledge tiers, allowed you to claim a key and choose a logo to put on it there, a little stencil. So this person, whoever this backer was, chose this kind of tidal wave aesthetic. And again, it's a weird looking socket, isn't it? We have no central hole. We have no contact pin slots. We just have the 2 pin slots on right and left to add some stability. And we have the LED. So that's what allows, of course, Wooting to put this stuff on the board, because there's no big hole sitting right in the middle of that socket. So the one thing I wanted to do here was pull off the stabilizers and just see what's going on there. So let's do that. We can easily use these tweezers here to just push on the clip, which allows us to lift the stabilizer up just like so, and lift it out of its spot. And you can see that, yes, it is definitely lubed in there. Got big globs of that Molly coat in there, which is probably why we have so little rattle. It feels nice and smooth. And then underneath we have spots for pads, but it looks like it's not padded. Oh no, wait, is that a lie? I can't tell if that's just the PCB or if those are pads. Let's see. Let's just poke them. Yeah, so that's just a PCB. It's been stenciled again with the bottom out spots for each of those stabilizers. If you wanted to put some pads on there, you totally could. It's really nice that they have those graphics on there so you know exactly where to pad it. You could just do a Band-Aid mod, very, very cheap, very, very easy, if you wanted a softer bottom out on your stabs. But from the factory, they don't appear to include any sort of padding on those stabs. Of course, plate mount stabs just pop right back in, nice and easy. The switch should just, oops, pop back in, nice and easy, like so. And there we have it. I'm going to go give my hands a little wash before we get to the next step here, just so I'm not making the keyboard all greasy. I'll be right back. And as you may have noticed, I actually already managed to get a little bit of grease on the keycaps here, which should be fine. It'll just come off. But anyhow, let's put that backspace key back on now. Now that we've investigated that. And interesting, very interesting. So the bottom out sound is really nice. The top out is a little bit clattery, isn't it? Interesting. I wonder, well, anyway, we'll find out when we take it for a proper typing test, but I just wanted to feel that. The switches, again, very smooth, perfectly linear, no bump or anything on the way down. They feel a bit like a Cherry MX Red linear switch, if you're familiar with that, but they're a little bit lighter to actuate. They're 40 grams rather than the 45 grams of a Cherry MX Red, although I feel like somehow the bottom out feels heavier. I'm not sure if they're progressive springs or just perfectly linear in their weight. At any rate, they are very smooth and they sound pretty good, Although I do maintain that top out sound is a little bit clattery. That rebound sound is just a little bit on the clattery side. Anyway, but they feel really nice, and they definitely feel more stable than a Cherry MX Red and smoother than a Cherry MX Red. I would say they feel on par with some of the smoothest linears I've ever used. The Glorious Lynx switches, which I have lubed, are very smooth. They have a similar kind of feel. The stability is not the best I've ever felt. They do have a bit of wobble to them. You can probably see that. But it's better than your typical Cherry MX clone, I would say. So that's good. And finally, let's give this thing a little flex test just to see. So very little flex, even for a plastic case like this, and almost no creaking, which is a sign of a nice quality case as well. So overall, this thing seems really well built. It seems refined and well considered when it comes to the stabilizers, the sound profile, and all that. We will, of course, take it for a proper typing test in a little bit so that you guys will be able to see it and hear it in full action as I type on it. But for now, we're going to take a look at the RGB backlighting, and then very critically, we're going to look at the software, because I think that's going to be really important for this keyboard as well. And then somewhere in there, I'm going to test out how the analog control works. That is, of course, the big gimmick, selling point, whatever you want to call it, for this keyboard. I'm not sure how I'm going to demonstrate that to you guys. I might just try it, or I might just use it if we're gaming and such, and then report back to you with how it feels. But we'll talk about it more when we get to the software part as well. So, but first, let's take a look at the backlighting on the Wooting 60 HE. Just kidding. Before we go into the RGB backlighting, I actually remembered I wanted to attach the wrist strap, or not wrist, but carrying strap here, just show you how that works. And I thought it might be fun actually to use the switch opener and take a look at the interior of one of the switches as well. So let's just really quickly attach this wrist strap, because I think it'll look nice and you can see how that works. So I guess because it's, I was going to say it's reversible, so you could do it this way or this way, but really this way doesn't work because everything's mirror imaged. So this way it shall be. And it looks like all we have to do is take this rubber bit here and thread it through. If we can do that. There we go. Like so. And we'll take this here and sort of sandwich it like so. And then we will use these included screw bits. Does this actually go through? I should have looked at the diagram. They provided a diagram for a reason. This must go through. And then, so we just have to make sure it goes through all the holes. There it is. And then we take this and we just do this, and you could, it's got a slot so you could use a little flathead screwdriver on there, but it's totally possible to just do this by hand like so. There's one, and then the other one will be just the same. Now all the holes are lined up, so this should be pretty easy. Oh, I spoke too soon. Almost. There we go. Just making a fool of me. There's that one. And we just take this and we screw that in there. So I can see why they don't ship it with this attached, because realistically, a carrying strap is not something most people are going to need for their keyboard. How often are you going to just take your keyboard and carry it around like this? But it's more of an aesthetic thing than anything. And I've actually never seen a keyboard with one quite like that before, so it's kind of cool. It's a characteristic feature. It sets it apart a little bit. So that's neat. So that's over there. Then the other thing I was going to do is just show you very quickly how this switch opener works. And we can open a switch and see what's inside. It should be really straightforward because there's really not much going on in these switches, as we described already. There's basically the case, the stem, and the spring, I believe. So, but the way these switch openers work is really simple. You'll see the upper housing of the switch here has 4 little clips. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those need to unclip to lift off the top. So that's what these corresponding little prongs are about in the switch opener. And we should just be able to pop this on here like so. There, so it just kind of sits on there. And then the top part will hold the top housing once we put this down like so. So we just push down and voila, there we are. So now we've got the top housing nicely held here and the remainder of the switch down here. And we can use our handy dandy tweezers to remove these parts and take a look at them. So here's the stem. I mean, you can just use your fingers too, but we can take a close look at this and see that it is lightly lubricated, I believe. Maybe. If it is, it's very light. It is, actually. You can see a little bit on the side there. So it's quite lightly lubed. But that's really how you want it. You don't want a lot of lubricant in your switch because it's what you want is to ease the friction between the parts, so there's less friction, but you don't want so much that it's making it gummy. And then here's the little spring, which, as I said, is 40 grams, so it's a pretty light spring. And it's just a single spring. It's not a two-piece or anything like that. So, and that's it. And it's just the bottom housing and the top part. So let's just put that back on there, and we should just be able to pop our stem back on there. And let's just grab our top here, and we should just be able to sandwich it all back together like so. Oops. Ta-da! And then it snaps back together, just like that. Very straightforward. And that's it. Those are the only moving parts in there, so not much else to see. But anyway, these little switch openers, handy for that sort of thing. I've managed to somehow detach the loop here, but I think I was supposed to let this go back through there. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And like I said, also this can be used as a little switch tester unit if you want. You can just pop a switch in the top here, and there you have a little tester mount there. Okay, that's all I wanted to show you additionally. So, okay, now for real, it's time for the RGB. Let's go check that out. And here we have the Wooting 60 HE plugged in and looking fairly colorful. I have the lights dimmed, so hopefully you can see the RGB well enough. And I've picked a slightly different camera angle from what I normally use that's hopefully a little bit more interesting and dynamic and gives you a better feel of how the keyboard looks on a desk. So right off the bat, the RGB looks great. The colors are bright and vivid, nice and saturated. The gradients look smooth. I don't discern any flicker in the RGB. If you see any on the camera, that's just an artifact of the frequency of the LEDs and the camera. So that's not visible in person. It looks very smooth and, like I said, nicely saturated. That's usually a sign of high quality LEDs. So I have the software open here because, as far as I can tell, it's not possible to change the backlighting effects just from the keyboard. It looks like you have to use the software. The software is cutely named Wootility, the Wootility, which is somewhat clever. And there's some good news. It's available for a lot of different platforms as a download, but also as a web-based utility that doesn't require any installation whatsoever. That's pretty cool. I really appreciate that Wooting provides that flexibility. Here, though, I have the Windows 10 app version, and as you can see, it's got quite a bit going on. So let's start off with the RGB, since that's what we're looking at right now. So we have a selection of RGB effects to pick from here. We can turn off the RGB. Oh, that's not off at all. That's just a fixed, I see, a fixed rainbow. and we can pick various presets. Gotcha. Or there's per key options as well. We'll stick with the rainbow for now. Then there's various animations like wave, scan, breathing, color cycling, ripple, which will be a reactive mode, trail, which also appears to be a reactive mode, touch. Interesting. Okay. Okay, so what touch is showing is the amount of pressure you're putting on a key. So this here is the function key, which I'm pressing down, and you can see along the top here, it indicates how much I've depressed that key. So no pressure, the number keys are not lit up at all. Full pressure, lit up all the way to the plus. And then there's gradations in between as I move up and down on that key, which actually gives you a good sense of that analog control, how that works. Like so. We'll take another look at that in the software as well in just a moment. And we've got some others. Jelly, more reactive modes by the look of it. AOE, which is another reactive mode. Mixing, oh my. That's another pressure sensitive one where the brightness of the whole keyboard varies with pressure. Very cool. An RT display? I'm not sure. You know what that is? That is showing the trigger point. So it lights up once it hits that actuation point. And each key will do that. Because of course this keyboard has configurable actuation points on a per key basis, which is really cool, honestly. So we'll stick with the basic wave for now though, and you can see that most of these animated effects have a variety of options. We've got a brightness setting, which it's great to see that as we change the settings, it's automatically propagated to the board in real time. We can change the speed, slow, medium, or fast. We can change the direction, left or right. Sadly, no up or down, or outside or inside out or outside in ripple, but at least we can change the direction of the wave here. And of course, we can change the colors as well. The ocean one's kind of nice, actually. That's very calming vibes. Maybe we'll keep it on that for now. So that's the RGB situation. Now, you might have noticed that we have several profiles up here on the left. This keyboard can save to the board one so-called digital profile where keys are either on or off, actuated or not. That's your typical behavior for a mechanical switch. Then we have 3 analog profiles that come pre-configured, but we can create our own and replace any of these profiles using the Create Profile button. But the pre-configured profiles, the analog profiles, let's take a look at those. So in this mode, each key is reading analog input. If we go to, for example, Racing Profile, you can see that W, A, S, and D are actually emulating controller functions. Right trigger, left stick left, left stick right. And that allows you to use the analog effects in many games, any game that will receive analog controller input. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to our digital profile here, what they call the typing profile by default, because they recommend it for typing, because that's sort of the behavior that people expect when typing. So we looked at the RGB effects, and then you can see that along the bottom here, we have a handful of other tabs. You can also cycle through those tabs using the left or right arrows here. I do wish these arrows were a little more obvious, because at first I wasn't quite clear on their function. but yeah, they cycle through these tabs at the bottom. So in the digital profile mode, we have color control that works on a per key basis, if you like. We have performance control, so we have several options here. The actuation point, as I was saying, can be varied from 0.1 millimeter, so basically a hair trigger, all you have to do is brush it for it to actuate, all the way to 4 millimeters, which means you have to bottom the key out right to the bottom before it registers. It defaults to 1 millimeter, which is maybe a little bit higher than most people will be used to for mechanical switches, but it is a nice balance between sensitivity and responsiveness. You can also do this on a per key basis by clicking on a key and adjusting the actuation point. That is pretty darn cool. Or you can select groups of keys all together like that as well. So that's really neat. And I mean, that's a level of configurability that you just don't see on other keyboards. It's simply impossible to configure the actuation point on anything but a Hall effect keyboard like this, as I understand it. We have the rapid trigger mode, which we can enable or disable. So what that does is typically when you press down on a key, when you go down past the actuation point, the key will actuate, it will activate, and then before the key resets, you have to come back up past that actuation point. However, the rapid trigger mode allows a dynamic adjustment, which means you can press down and it'll actuate when you go past that actuation point, but you can set it so that as soon as you lift off, it automatically resets, or you can adjust the liftoff distance from, well, it looks like 2.4 to 0.1 millimeters. So 0.1, basically as soon as you lift off on that key at all, it will reset. And at 2.4, then you have to lift up 2.4 millimeters of travel distance before it resets, and then can read the input again when you press down on it. So 1 millimeter is the default here. You can also do this on a per key basis, which is crazy. That's really, really cool. But that allows for rapidly feathering a key if that's something you want to do for some gameplay reason. But in the digital profile, it is automatically turned off by default. Tachyon mode here is their rapid response mode, the rapid polling rate mode. So by default, I think this thing has 1000 hertz polling rate, which is pretty typical and very, very fast. If we turn on tachyon mode, it gets the polling rate to sub-millisecond, so very, very fast response times. But we do have to sacrifice a few things to do that. It says here, tachyon mode optimizes your keyboard for input speed. When enabled, every key press responds as fast as possible. The RGB effects are disabled for optimal result. Analog stability might be affected. So this does come with some caveats. If we turn it on, we see current speed, polling speed doubles to about a millisecond, but we will leave it off for now. And actually, when we turned it on, interestingly, the RGB is still on, but there's no animations. It appears to be the compromise. So, but let's go back to our color. Let's set it back to the wave, because I like that. Of course, under the remap tab here, we have all the kind of remapping that you might expect. You can do this on a per key basis, of course. We have all your basic input characters, special character options, all kinds of things, you know, special functionality, media functions, that sort of thing. For what it's worth, a lot of this already exists on the secondary function layer, which I didn't mention, but if you see here, if we mouse over function, when we hold down function 1, this secondary function layer is activated. And actually we can switch it here too. But you can see that we have arrow keys here, of course. We also have media keys here. These are switches between the analog profiles, so profile 1, 2, and 3, A1, A2, A3, And then function enter switches between your digital profile and then your last selected analog profile. Of course, we have delete up here, all our function keys up here, page up, page down, home and end under the WASD, which I find to be a very satisfactory place to bind those. And all kinds of other stuff. We also get a secondary function layer, which by default is toggled with function 2 over here. And by default, they have it bound to Epic Gamer Move, which is maybe a little bit cringe, but you know what? That's fine. You can do whatever you like with the secondary function layer, of course. Activate it with your pinky on caps lock, and then go to town with bindings. And you can add additional layers too. I don't know exactly how many, but presumably enough. If you have 3 function layers or more is not sufficient for you, maybe you need a bigger keyboard, I guess. There's also various other presets here for alternative layouts, Dvorak, Colmac, these kinds of things, which is kind of fun. And then if we go to advanced keys, there's some really cool stuff here. So this will allow us to configure tap keys, which is a feature that I've seen only on one other keyboard. This was on the AnPro 2, and I really liked the implementation on the AnPro 2 because it kind of lets you have your cake and eat it too when it comes to dedicated arrow keys in the bottom right here. For example, if we right-click on right shift here, or left-click, we can add this mod tap option. So what that does is gives the key 2 different functions depending on whether it's being held down or simply tapped. So if we want it so that it still operates as right shift when held down, but we want it to be an up arrow when tapped, we can enable mod tap. By default, the hold function is right shift, the default option there. For tap, we can come down to where here? Extended characters, perhaps. Yes, there we go. We can drag the up arrow into the tap there, and then we just hit done. And now we can see we have 2 functions. When we hold it down, it's shift. If we tap it, it's up arrow. And we can reconfigure menu, control, and function in the same way so that we have up, left, down, and right as the tap functions, and the default functions as the hold functions. You could do that with any key on the keyboard if you like, but for me, it's intuitive to have those arrow keys down here. And of course, it doesn't have to be arrow keys. You can do it with whatever you like. One great function is, of course, the caps lock key over here. You can have it function as regular caps lock when you tap it, but function as a function 2 button, so to access the second function layer when held. These sorts of things. And then we can test our bindings down here. As you can see, arrow up is now bound to the tap, whereas shift is bound to the hold. Very cool. An awesome function that I really wish more keyboards would implement. Like I said, I've only seen it on the AnPro 2 before, and it was one of my favorite functions on that board. So those are the only settings available to us under the digital profile. But if we go to a racing profile here, for example, which is analog profile 2, you can see that we have some other stuff that opens up to us, specifically the gamepad options, because once again, this is an analog mode. So if we go to gamepad mapping, you can see that we are emulating an Xbox controller right now. We have all the different directions on the sticks. We have the D-pads, A, B, X, Y, everything on your Xbox controller. You can set this to emulate different kinds of controllers, and that is over under the settings menu here, which we will look at shortly. But by default, they recommend Xbox for the best compatibility on Windows. There are some options here for whether the keyboard keys also function in tandem with the analog functions. So whether WASD will also trigger in addition to the controller functions that will trigger these sorts of things. And then we can test the response of our gamepad over here on this page. So here's our little gamepad tester. So by default, under the default racing profile, A is left stick left, D is left stick right. So let's see if that works. And indeed it does. And here you can see exactly what I was saying about the analog input, depending on how much you push down on it. You get that control. And then W and S, of course, are acceleration and brake. And so this allows you, in a racing game, for example, to have control over your throttle just by feathering that key lightly, which is super duper cool. Really, really neat. Really does combine the best of gamepads with the best of PC peripherals, like a mouse and keyboard. What is this? Enable angle adjustment. When pressing forward and left, right, you walk in a diagonal direction. Adjust the slider to modify the center point. Oh, very cool. You can also adjust the response curve of the input. So by default, it's linear. But if you want it to actuate slower along that linear input axis, you can. So that gives you a little more sensitivity near the top. You can have instant, which is basically setting it to a digital input, which is kind of a weird choice, but you could. All kinds of options there, which is pretty neat. And we have this little input curve here to demonstrate that. Let's see what's under advanced settings. Use square joystick output. Recommended for certain games, but might break compatibility with others. Snappy joystick. When enabled, the joystick will use a maximum value of opposite sides of the axis rather than combining them. Got it. Allows you to snap back and forth quickly rather than averaging out inputs if multiple keys are held down. So that's really cool. That's really, really cool. So that is how Wooting implements their analog controls. And that should work, I think, with pretty much any game that will receive analog input from a controller. So that's widely compatible. Of course, up here, we hit save to keyboard to actually implement this, and we can undo any changes we've made in order to and redo as well. Change any stuff we might have done or ways we might have screwed things up. I will save this one because I actually do want the mod tab enabled here. And it works just like that. Save to keyboard, typing profile saved. And then that is built in to the onboard memory, saved to the onboard memory, so that you can take this anywhere with you and it will operate in that way. All of the profiles, all 4 of them, are saved on board, which is fantastic. You can see that there is a limit for these mod tap options or these other weird advanced configurations. You get 20 per profile, but that should still be plenty for your average user. One other thing to look at here is the settings. So we have interface, light or dark theme. I have light theme here just because on dark it kind of disappears into my background, my black background here. But I guess this is a little easier on your eyes. So now that you've seen it on light, let's keep it on dark for now. A lot of different language options for keyboard settings. So we can disable end key rollover. End key rollover is a feature that lets you hold down as many keys as you like at a time, and they will all continue to provide input. However, that breaks compatibility with some devices, such as PS4 in this case. So you can turn it off, and that'll enable just 6 key rollover, which is still probably enough for most people, but if you can use the end key rollover, you may as well. Chroma Connect will synchronize with Razer's Chroma software and RGB environment, which is kind of a nice little thing if you want to synchronize it with your mouse or something like that, if you use Razer Chroma. this is what I was mentioning for the gamepad mode. You can actually emulate a couple of different controllers. The Xbox is selected by default. The Classic is recommended for older games that don't receive the X input. This is instead what they call HID gamepad input. So that gives you some flexibility there. Or you can disable gamepad emulation entirely. RGB sleep mode does exactly what it says. You can turn it on and have the keyboard dim and eventually turn off when it's not in use, which is handy if you're using it in, say, a darkened bedroom or something and you don't want the lights blasting all the time. But of course, also it is a wired keyboard. There's no wireless, so it's not like it's using battery or anything like that either. And then there's the full reset here if you want to go that route. There's also access to a variety of guides, which are all available on Wooting's website. There's an easy updater. When I first installed this software, it recognized that my keyboard firmware was not up to date. It prompted me to update, and it led me through that process very, very simply and quickly, which is great to see. And troubleshooting options here as well. Still reading? Please contact the quick support. They've got a Discord or an email. And an error log that you can check out as well, actually. And then down here, we've just got some basic info. The Wootility patch notes are available, gives you your firmware. And then, once again, her serial number is, this is a female keyboard, evidently. This is this keyboard serial. And that's all of it. That is the Wootility. As I said, this is also all available as an online utility that doesn't require you to install anything. As far as I know, it includes all the functions that you see here, which is pretty remarkable. And again, they can get away with this because it saves everything to your keyboard. So you don't need the driver running in the background to make this stuff work. It just works on board. So you can configure it online, upload those changes to the keyboard with that save keyboard, and then take it anywhere and plug it in and have it work as configured. So overall, I am really impressed with the Wootility. It has pretty much everything you would expect out of good keyboard software and then some. I love that it includes the mod tap feature. I love the way they've implemented the gamepad emulation, at least in theory. I have yet to actually try it out extensively in any gaming situation, so that will be my next step here after we've finished looking at the keyboard. But that's the long and the short of the software and the overall configurability and functions of the keyboard. So what does that leave us with? Why, the typing test, of course. So let's take this thing for a spin so that you can see it and hear it in action. All right, let's talk a bit about the Wooting 60 HE now that we've had a chance to inspect it thoroughly, see its functions, its backlighting, its software, and also hear and see it in action with that typing test. Let's start with the typing experience since that's what you just saw and heard. The typing experience is very good. This is a nice sounding keyboard with a pleasant Thawkeen-ishness to the switches. It's not the best sounding board that I've ever used, or the best feeling for that matter, but the switches are very, very smooth, and overall it is well above average in that regard. It's let down slightly by the stabilizers not being tuned perfectly, and I think something about the design of these switches just doesn't quite have the satisfactory bottom out that others I've used do. And I think the plastic construction of the keyboard maybe confers a slightly cheaper typing feel than something that would be a bit more solid and weighty with some metal in it. But those are very minor nitpicks. Overall, it does really feel great to type on, and for most people, it's going to be a vast improvement over what they're probably used to. So overall, good attention has been paid to the feel and sound of this board, and I think it's really quite pleasant. So with that aside, let's talk about the key feature of this board, which is, of course, those analog switches. Are they worth it? Is it a game changer, or are they just kind of gimmicky? Well, I think, first of all, it's important to say that they work really well. They have designed, with A being Wooting, has designed the software really well and allows the switches to be as useful as possible. I tested this board out across a variety of games. I tried some racing games like Forza 5, and, well, like driving games, I guess, like Forza 5 and Euro Truck Simulator 2, because ETS 2 is not really a racing game, but it's a driving simulator. I played some fast-paced shooters like Overwatch 2. I've played quite a bit of that on this keyboard. I played some RPGs. I tried some Skyrim, things like that. I really wanted to get a feel for sort of the breadth of situations where this keyboard could really shine. And in the right games, the analog switches make a big difference. They are effective. They are very functional. They work really, really well. For example, I think maybe the greatest strength of these switches is in driving games. The ability to have analog control over your throttle, over your steering, really, really helps. I found in Euro Truck Simulator 2, actually, this keyboard was excellent because there's a lot of times in that game where you need to make very fine adjustments to your steering, like when you're trying to back up or maneuver in tight spaces. And also then being able to use the rest of the keyboard for all the controls in that simulator style game is really useful. Usually the way I play ETS2 is with a controller, and that works great for the analog input side of things, but not so well for the many controls that are available. Have limited buttons on the controller. So having the analog control and the plethora of keys available under your fingertips is a real boon in something like ETS2. And personally, I think that's where this keyboard shines its most. But in Forza Horizon 5, also really great to have the analog control, although it's never going to match up to a wheel and pedals for a driving experience. But it certainly is cheaper to have a single keyboard rather than buying a wheel and pedals and a keyboard, and it's convenient to have the analog control and the keyboard in one device. In other games, I found it to be maybe a bit less impactful. I will say that the ability to control the actuation point in 0.1 millimeter intervals from the very top to the very bottom of these switches is fantastic. You can make them as sensitive or as insensitive as you like. And also the ability to have the reset point immediately occur as soon as you lift up off that switch, no matter where in the travel you lift off that switch, is really, really cool. As I said, I use this game a lot in Overwatch 2, and at first I found it almost too sensitive, so I had to play around with that actuation point a little bit, but I got it dialed in, and it feels really, really good. I'm not good enough at the game to really necessarily notice the difference between like a 2-second and a 1 millisecond response time, for example, but I can feel the difference between an actuation point that's like, you know, 0.2, 0.3 millimeters from the top versus one that occurs sort of halfway through the action. And it does feel very sensitive, very responsive, to the point where, as I said, it took me a while to get it dialed in, because there will be times if you set that sensitivity really high, that actuation right at the top, where you're just barely brushing a key with your finger and it's actuating, and that can be a little disorienting at first, a little problematic, until you realize just how light, how sensitive these switches can be, and you know, play around with it a bit to get it dialed in. But overall, my experience using this game for sort of high-speed reaction-based games and first-person shooters was really good. Is it appreciably or massively better than conventional switches? I would say probably not dramatically, but it does feel very responsive. It does feel very sensitive. And people who are better than me at those kinds of games would probably be able to get even more out of this design and technology. Other games like Skyrim, RPGs, slower paced games that aren't quite so reaction based, or anything that's turn based or whatever, they don't benefit as much from these designs. It's uncommon to have a use for analog inputs in those kinds of games, or if you do, you know, it's not as critical as something like a driving game. And the split-second reaction is, again, not as critical in those kinds of games. So it was good for those games. It was totally functional, felt great. But I would say that driving games and fast-paced first-person games are probably its strength. One thing you could do is, if you wanted to be able to, say, walk instead of run in Skyrim, this allows you to do that. That's usually something I do for my Skyrim wandering videos, and that usually involves me using a controller and just barely moving the stick to walk really slowly. You can do that with this keyboard, but of course the mouse look is still going to be a bit more jerky than, say, panning smoothly with a controller stick. So for that kind of application, like game videography, you know, you still probably want to use a controller, I would think. It wasn't a perfect experience, though. Overall, I did find that, you know, the 4 millimeters from top to bottom, the travel distance for each switch, really doesn't feel like much, and so it feels like you use up your travel distance very quickly when you're trying to do stuff that requires great sensitivity with the analog controls, the analog inputs. And so you do get used to that over time, like, you know, just how to just barely feather the throttle and that kind of thing in a driving game, but it took me a while to get that feel down. Of course, you can also adjust the response curve in the Wooting software, which allows you to you know, ameliorate that situation somewhat. And on that note, the Wooting software is really, really good. It has lots of features that are very useful to this specific board, and none of the features that you don't need. It is really functional. It is clean. It is intuitive. I found it head and shoulders above most of the keyboard software I use, including the stuff from big companies like Corsair. It is so much better than Corsair's IQ software, so much more intuitive. So the utility, definitely an A+ there. Also great that you can use it as a web app. You don't even have to download and install it, which is pretty darn cool. You will find that the ability to rapidly swap between profiles with the function enter key, or to swap between the digital and the analog profile with the function enter, or between the analog profiles with function P, left and right bracket. You'll be using that a lot, because obviously if you have keys emulating controller inputs, that can be problematic if you then want to just use it for typing or something like that, right? So that quick swap between profiles, really, really good. So overall, I've really enjoyed my time with the Wooting 60 HE. I think that depending on the kinds of games you're playing, the analog control can be very useful, and it's not just a gimmick. But for other gamers, it might not be so useful. And in that case, then you're not really getting the value out of this keyboard's unique trick that it has up its sleeve, right? So really you need to think about what you want out of a keyboard, and whether the analog control that this keyboard offers is going to be useful to you, right? But I will say that just as an everyday driver, a general keyboard, it's pretty darn good. It's, as I said, not the best that I've ever used or felt or heard, but it's pretty good. It's certainly quite respectable, above average. So that was my usage experience with the Wooting 60 HE. Another thing that I wanted to quickly mention is that this keyboard does come with a 4-year warranty. That is pretty unprecedented. I've never seen a 4-year warranty on a keyboard. 1 year is typical, 2 years is uncommon, 4 years is way out there. So it's really cool that Wooting stands behind their product so strongly that they would warranty it for 4 years. Clearly, they build these things to last, and they are confident in its ability to do so. Okay, it's a lot of talking, but hopefully that gives you some useful information. The next step is we're going to run down the pros and the cons of this keyboard before I give you my final verdict on it. And because I'm a positive kind of guy, let's start with the pros. There's a lot to like about this keyboard, and the major thing, to not beat around the bush here, is of course those analog switches. They are literal game changers in some games and some situations. Driving games are one of the strongest use cases for this particular keyboard and the analog switch technology. And it depends on what kind of games you're playing, whether you're going to get a lot or a little bit of use out of them, but nonetheless, the analog switches set this board apart from its competitors. They are its unique selling feature, and for people who think they might use them, it certainly doesn't hurt to have the analog switches on the board, because it's a good board otherwise as well. One of the run-on effects of these analog switches is the ability to have per key actuation point and recovery point adjustment. This is something else that I've never seen on any other keyboard before, and it makes this keyboard useful for a whole other range of games, such as reaction-based, shooters, fast-paced games where having that just hair trigger actuation makes a difference. Competitive shooters, of course, are a big one. And having that rebound point be dynamic so that wherever you've pushed that key down to, as soon as you lift off of it, you're getting the reset, and then you can push down again to actuate again. That's really cool. That's another feature that no other keyboard offers, and is only facilitated because of these Hall effect switches that Wooting offers. And when I say no other keyboard, I know Wooting has a few other keyboards that use these Hall effect analog switches, so those are included, I guess. But and only keyboards from Wooting using the analog switches have this ability. So that's definitely a selling point for this board. Some of the other things this keyboard does are a bit more mundane, but still deserve to be called out as positives. For example, the double-shot PBT keycaps on the Wooting 60 HE are of excellent quality. They look and feel good. They're nice and thick. The manufacturing appears to be of high quality. However, there is a caveat in which they are only available on the NC layout, the US layout model, and apparently on the ISO DE, so the German layout as well, but not on any of the others. Those ones get ABS keycaps, which may be fine. I don't know. I haven't seen them or tried them out, but it's just kind of unfortunate and a little bit strange that those PBT keycaps are only available on those two models. But nevertheless, the ones that I have on the keyboard that I reviewed are excellent. Speaking of excellent, this keyboard has really good typing sound and feel. It has a pleasant, dampened kind of sound to it with a really pleasing, thocky, clacky kind of sound signature, which is, desirable for many people. Some people prefer different sounds, but it's, of course, totally subjective. In my opinion, I think it sounds pretty nice. Not the very best keyboard I've ever heard. There are others that sound and feel better that are cheaper than this keyboard, but it does a good job overall. Even if the stabilizers aren't perfectly tuned and the sound signature's not quite there, it's pretty darn good. It's well above average. You will not be disappointed by the typing sound or feel on this keyboard, especially if you are also interested in the other unique aspects, primarily the analog switches. Another really strong point of this keyboard is its software. It is way, way, way better than the keyboard software for most boards that I've reviewed. It is relatively clean, the interface is, and it's not cluttered with all kinds of unnecessary features. Yet at the same time, it is very feature-rich and allows you to really configure those analog switches to get the most usefulness out of them and really dial them in the way you like them. I appreciate all the configuration options for the analog input that Wooting has included here. Overall, the software feels intuitive, it's snappy, it works really well. And you can even use it as an online configurator rather than having to download and install an app. So what's not to like about it is one of, if not the best pieces of keyboard software that I've ever had the pleasure of using. And it absolutely kicks the poop out of keyboard software from other big companies. Like, I keep picking on Corsair, but some of the stuff that I've used most recently that I really had issues with. So it's way better than Corsair's IQ software, better than most other keyboard software that I've used. And finally, Wooting's exceptional 4-year warranty on this keyboard, once again, blows the competition out of the water. I've never seen a keyboard warranted for that long before. Usually it's warranted for a year, maybe 2 on the outside. 4 years, unprecedented. I've never seen that before. Maybe there are some boards that have warranties that long, but this is the only one that I know of. So Wooting is clearly very confident about standing behind their product with that warranty. And for that, they are to be commended. Over here on the cons side of things, there's a couple of things I want to talk about, but they're pretty minor nitpicks. There's not a lot to dislike about this keyboard, honestly. The first that I'm going to call out, though, is its plastic construction. This is a $175 keyboard, so it's not cheap. And it is made with mostly plastic, with the exception of the steel top plate or positioning plate there. But the bezel, the top plate, and the underside are all just plastic. It feels like good plastic, feels like high quality plastic, but nonetheless, at this price point, you really want to see some more metal, some aluminum being used in that build. I have other keyboards at this price point that are all plastic, but they all offer unique aesthetics or other unique features in their design that warrant that. For instance, maybe they're entirely transparent or something along those lines, designed to show off the guts of the keyboard, you know. It's not the case with the Wooting 60 HE. This board looks very, very plain, and I think would really benefit from having a bit of aluminum on top. It doesn't have to be a lot, just a bit, just to make it feel that extra bit more premium and, you know, sort of match the build quality and materials of other keyboards in this price bracket. So, but it is built well, like it works fine. It feels solid. It just doesn't feel quite as premium as it could. So that's one of my minor nitpicks here. Another one that I have is something I already talked about in the pros section, and that's the weird situation where some of the ISO layouts are unfortunately stuck with ABS plastic keycaps. Now, there's nothing wrong with ABS plastic. I'm sure that those other keycaps are double shot, just like the PBT keycaps on this board. They probably look and feel just fine, but PBT is nice in that it doesn't shine up over time as you get your finger oils on it, and you know, there's friction on those keys. ABS will do that, PBT will not. PBT is often a preferred plastic for enthusiast grade keycaps. It's kind of weird that you can't get the PBT caps in all the ISO layouts. I assume it's something to do with not being able to source, or it not being worth it to manufacture PBT sets in some other layouts and languages, but nonetheless, just kind of unfortunate. So the PBT keycaps are only available on the ANSI US layout and the ISO DE layout, the German one. The others are all ABS. And the final thing that I'm going to mention here, and this is barely even a drawback, really, it's just something I want to make sure you realize, is that the hot swap sockets on this board only support the analog switches from Wooting. So you can't just pop any other kind of mechanical switch in there, because this board and the PCB is specially designed for use with the Hall effect switches. So that might be kind of obvious and apparent to some people, but it does mean that the customizability of this keyboard is quite limited compared to, you know, every other keyboard with hot swap sockets at this price point. You're not going to be able to swap in, say, tactile switches or experiment with the wide world of other mechanical switches. Now, the switches this board does offer are very good, and they are certainly much more advanced in their ability, the analog input and all that, than your typical mechanical switch. But if you're primarily looking for typing sound and feel, and you want to be able to experiment with other kinds of mechanical switches, this is not the keyboard for you. That's going to be a drawback that definitely factors into some people's purchasing decisions, and I wanted to make sure that I let you guys know that was the case. All right, my friends, let's bring this home. What is my final verdict on Wooting's very unique 60 HE keyboard? Well, it's an excellent keyboard. It's clear that a lot of thought and care went into the design and manufacture of this board, and it has a feature that sets it apart from every other keyboard on the market, and that is exactly what you need in this day and age to stand out and to have a success with a mechanical keyboard in such a crowded market. So I think this is a great board, and I think that as far as the flagship feature, the analog switches go, they're not a gimmick. They work really, really well. And if you are the kind of user or gamer or that can take advantage of those analog switches, then this is well worth considering as a primary keyboard. That being said, not everybody is going to be able to make good use of the analog switches. Maybe the games you play just don't use analog control, or maybe you don't care about adjustable actuation points or reset points on your switches. Maybe you already have a nice controller and you are happy swapping between a keyboard and a controller whenever you want the analog or the keyboard control. I will say, a lot of the time, that's me. I'm totally happy to use my Xbox controller for driving games, and for, third-person action games and that kind of stuff, and to switch to my mouse and keyboard for first-person shooters and strategy games and isometric RPGs and that kind of stuff. I have no problem swapping back and forth. So maybe that's you, in which case maybe an analog keyboard isn't so important to you. But if you really like to use your mouse and keyboard for everything, and yet you play games that could benefit from the analog control, like driving games and such, then I think Wooting's keyboard is really, really cool. And that's where this feature becomes useful and not gimmicky. So that's going to be a subset of people. And it does mean that if you are looking for a mechanical keyboard that is all about the sound and feel and the configurability, maybe Wooting 60 HE is not for you, because of course you can't swap out the switches on here for other kinds of mechanical switches. There's just an incredible diversity of different switch types and feels and sounds and things like that, which will not be available to you with this keyboard. It's not really a good foundation for experimentation or tinkering or anything like that. Nonetheless, it is a really, really cool board. What it does very, very well. The stock typing sound and feel are excellent. They're above average. There are better sounding and feeling boards at this price point or less, I will say. And there are boards that are certainly more customizable at this price point or less. But what Wooting does offer here is something that no other company does, and that's what sets this board apart. The fact that it is competent, or even better than competent, at all the other basic keyboard stuff, that's just the cherry on top. The software side of things is excellent. The Wootility is really, really good. Some of the best keyboard software that I've ever seen. And of course, the 4-year warranty on this keyboard is exceptional. Something that I've never seen before. Is really cool. The Wooting stands behind their product to that degree. So, the question of whether you should get the Wooting 60 HE really does come down to your needs, your use case, your plans for this board, what you want out of your keyboard. But if you are the kind of person that could benefit from or enjoy analog configurability, analog sensitivity and controls on your keyboard, then it is an excellent product. Highly, highly recommended. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of another relaxing review. Another nice long one. We got to really get in detail into this keyboard, and I really enjoyed checking it out because analog switches are not something I've ever seen before, so it was definitely fun to look at. Big thanks to Wooting for sending over the 60 HE that I looked at and tested out in detail here today. And of course, big thanks to this video's sponsor, Into the AM. They of the awesome graphic tees and all kinds of other elevated apparel that looks great, that feels great, that's easy to care for, and that you can get for 10% off by using the link down at the top of the video description, or by using coupon code the ASMR Nerd at checkout over on Into the AM's website. Thank you, Into the AM, for sponsoring this video and being such a great supporter of this channel. And of course, a big thanks to each and every one of you for watching. I hope you found this informative, and I hope you found it relaxing. And I look very forward to having you back here next time for another episode of Relaxing Reviews. Bye for now, my friends.